He had the world at his feet, the billion-dollar empire, the flashing cameras, and the kind of confidence only power can give. And, at his side, wasn't the woman who had lifted him there. It wasn't Stacy, the woman who once stayed up with him on the cold floor of a one-bedroom apartment, sketching out his first proposal on crumpled sheets of paper. No. Tonight, the billionaire walked proudly into the gala with his secretary, young, polished, and full of flattery, while the woman who built him watched from a corner, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. But here's the twist you'll want to hold on to, before the money, before the luxury cars and tailored suits, before the secretary. There was Stacy, and she wasn't just a girlfriend. She was the fire that lit his dreams, the hands that typed his future, the love that made him who he was. I need you to pause for a second and think, what would you do if the very person you sacrificed everything for discarded you for someone else the moment success came? Would you cry? Would you fight? Or would you rise again, stronger than before? Drop your answers in the comments, because tonight's story will test your heart. Imagine Stacy and Daniel in their earliest days. Two dreamers, no money, no connections. Just the heat of ambition and the comfort of each other's embrace. Nights where dinner was little more than bread and tea, but the way Daniel held Stacy afterward made her feel like the richest woman alive. Nights when his faith faltered, and she pressed her lips gently to his ear and whispered, "Don't give up, love. One day, the world will know your name." That whisper, that touch, that woman was the reason he ever stood tall enough to be seen. And yet, he forgot her. Stay with me to the end, because this story isn't just about love, betrayal, and heartbreak. It's about the lesson hidden in every sacrifice. Never forget the hands that built you. Before we dive deeper, let me welcome my returning viewers and say a warm hello to those joining us for the very first time. You're watching Mr. Leonardo's stories, where love, betrayal, and life lessons come alive in ways that make you feel every emotion. If you haven't already, take a second, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Because tonight, we're about to peel back the layers of Daniel's rise to power, Stacy's sacrifices, the allure of Marielle, and the devastating choice that would change everything. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. It's a lesson. It's a heartbeat you'll remember long after the video ends. The ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers, laughter, and the hum of cameras flashing against velvet curtains. Every eye followed him. Daniel, the billionaire whose name echoed in headlines, the man who was once nobody but had now become the center of everything. He wore power like a second skin, the tailored suit, the commanding smile, the confidence of someone who had conquered the world. And on his arm, a striking young woman, his secretary Marielle. But what no one noticed was the figure standing quietly in the back, a woman with eyes that carried both love and heartbreak, grace and ache. Stacy, the woman who had once built his dream from scraps of hope, the woman who had whispered him forward when the world was silent, the woman he had left behind. Because before the suits, before the billions, before the secretary, there was Stacy. And her love wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that bends, breaks, and rebuilds, all for someone else's rise. It was the kind of love that sacrifices dinners for dollar bills, sleepless nights for typed proposals, and personal dreams for someone else's future. Daniel wasn't born a billionaire. He wasn't even born lucky. He was a man with ideas that no one believed in. No one but Stacy. And she was the reason he even stood tall enough to be noticed. But when the world finally noticed him, he forgot the woman who lifted him high enough to reach it. So let this story pose a question. What happens when the one you gave your life to turns their back for someone prettier, younger, or more convenient? Would you forgive? Would you fight? Or would you walk away, letting your scars transform into strength? Let's rewind. Before the lights, before the money, before the betrayal. Imagine a tiny apartment where the paint chipped off the walls and the heater rattled in protest. Inside, two dreamers held each other against the cold. Stacy sat cross-legged on the floor, her laptop balanced on her knees, typing out Daniel's first proposal, while he paced the room, muttering ideas, stopping now and then to run his hands through his messy hair. Their dinner sat forgotten, just 2 slices of bread and a cup of tea they were sharing. But they didn't complain, because in that little space, love was enough. When Daniel's voice broke, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just wasting my time." Stacy set the laptop aside and went to him. She cupped his face, her thumbs brushing the worry from his brow, and whispered against his lips, "Don't you dare give up on yourself. One day, the world will know your name, Daniel, and when they do, I'll be right there beside you." The way she kissed him after that wasn't just love. It was a promise, a vow stitched into every heartbeat. "I believe in you when no one else does." And that vow carried him further than any investor ever could. But here's the tragedy waiting just beyond the horizon, the very lips that breathed life into him he would later silence. The very hands that typed his empire into existence, he would one day let go of. Stacy made him a billionaire, but when wealth wrapped itself around him, Daniel forgot where he came from. He forgot her. In those early days, their love wasn't measured in roses or candlelit dinners. It was measured in long walks when they couldn't afford bus fare, in laughter echoing through cracked walls, in the way Stacy curled against Daniel's chest after another investor said no, reminding him that rejection wasn't the end. They had nothing, but when he held her hand, it felt like everything. Sometimes, when the electricity was cut off and they worked by the flicker of a candle, Stacy would lean over, her hair brushing his shoulder, her scent filling his lungs, and whisper, "We're building something, love. Just wait. Our time is coming." And he would kiss her temple, murmuring, "As long as you're with me, I can face the world." Those weren't just words, they were lifelines. But lifelines can be cut. Dreams, when they finally come true, can turn into cages. And love, when tested by wealth, can either deepen or disappear. Daniel's test was coming. Stacy's heartbreak was on the horizon. And Marielle, the secretary who would one day stand beside him, was waiting in the shadows, ready to play her part. So this story begins not in triumph, but in sacrifice. It begins with whispered love in dimly lit rooms, with promises made when no one else was listening. It begins with Stacy and Daniel, 2 hearts, 1 dream, and no money to their names. And it begins with a truth. Stacy made him a billionaire. But in the process, Daniel lost something far more valuable than money. The story of Stacy and Daniel didn't begin with fortune or fame. It began in the quiet corners of hardship, in places where dreams seemed too fragile to survive. Stacy was the kind of woman whose presence softened even the harshest of days. She had grown up in a modest household, taught by her mother that resilience was stitched into a woman's heart. Life had never handed her luxury, but it had gifted her with brilliance, a sharp mind, an empathetic spirit, and a beauty that didn't need diamonds to shine. Daniel, on the other hand, was a man of ideas. Ideas so wild, so impossible, that people often dismissed him as a dreamer chasing shadows. He had charm, yes, and a voice that could convince even the stubborn to listen for a while. But charm alone couldn't pay rent, and more often than not, his ideas burned out before they found a spark. When Stacy met Daniel, he wasn't the polished billionaire the world would one day worship. He was just a young man in a wrinkled shirt, working shifts that barely covered his bills, with notebooks full of unfinished business plans and eyes full of hunger for something bigger. Most people saw him as reckless. Penny, Stacy's childhood friend, once warned her over coffee, "You, too smart to tie yourself to a man who's still guessing at life. He'll drag you down with him." Janet, another close friend, echoed the same sentiment. "You deserve stability, Stacy. Not broken promises and half-baked plans." But Stacy saw what no one else did. Beneath the doubt and failures, she saw Daniel's fire, a raw potential that only needed someone to believe in it. And so she chose him, not for who he was, but for who he could become. Their beginning was painted with sacrifice. Daniel would spend nights sketching out proposals on scrap paper, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Stacy worked double shifts. Mornings in an office, evenings waiting tables, just to keep food on their table, and the lights on in their small apartment. It wasn't much: peeling paint on the walls, a bed that creaked with every turn, and a kitchen so small that cooking felt like a balancing act. But to Stacy, that apartment was home because Daniel was there. They often ate meals so simple that anyone else would have complained. Plain rice, bread, and tea, sometimes noodles split between them. But Daniel would always make a joke out of it, lifting his fork with mock seriousness. "Feast of Kings," he'd say, and Stacy would laugh, her laughter filling the room with warmth no money could buy. After dinner, they would sit cross-legged on the floor, their shoulders pressed. Together, as Daniel explained his latest idea, his voice full of passion. Stacy would listen, scribbling notes, editing his words, molding his scattered thoughts into something presentable. "You make it sound better than it is," Daniel told her once, watching her fingers fly across the keyboard. "No," Stacy corrected softly, looking into his eyes. "I make it sound like what it could be. You just have to believe it's possible." And with that, she kissed him, a kiss that tasted like faith, like love, like every promise she was willing to make for his future. But love in hardship wasn't always easy. There were nights when Daniel came home defeated, rejected again by potential investors. Nights when he threw his notes to the ground, pacing the small space, his voice breaking. "They don't take me seriously, Stacy. They think I'm a joke. Maybe I am." Those words tore at her, but Stacy never let him sink. She would gather the papers, smooth them out, and place them back in his hands. Then she'd hold his face, her forehead pressed to his, whispering, "You are not a joke. You're a man ahead of his time. Let them laugh now. One day they'll regret ever doubting you." Her whispers weren't just words. They were lifelines. And when he kissed her in return, it wasn't out of passion alone, but gratitude. Gratitude for a woman who refused to let him drown. Their love grew in those quiet battles. Sometimes, on rare nights when neither of them had to work, they would take long walks through the city. They couldn't afford taxis, so they walked everywhere, hands intertwined. Daniel would tell her stories of the future, the company he would build, the wealth they would have, the home he'd buy her one day. Stacy would listen, her head resting on his shoulder, smiling at the man she believed in more than he believed in himself. "Do you really think we'll make it?" he asked her once, stopping under the glow of a street lamp. She lifted his hand to her lips, kissed it, and said, "I don't think. I know." And, for a moment, Daniel believed it too. Their struggles were intimate, a closeness forged not by luxury but by survival. The way she slipped into his arms after long shifts, too tired to speak but finding rest in his chest. The way he brushed strands of hair from her face, murmuring promises he had no way of keeping yet, but she trusted anyway. On nights when the electricity failed and they worked by candlelight, Stacy would lean against him, her warmth grounding him, her scent wrapping around him. Daniel often wondered how he'd gotten so lucky, how a woman so strong, so brilliant, so beautiful could choose him when he had so little to offer. "Why me?" he asked once, his voice low in the dark. Stacy smiled, tracing a finger down his jawline. "Because you don't see it yet. But I do. I see the man you're meant to be, and I'm not letting go until the world sees it too." He kissed her then, deeply, desperately, as if trying to absorb her faith into his bones. But faith came with a cost. To keep Daniel afloat, Stacy worked herself thin. 2 jobs, endless hours, the weight of bills and responsibilities pressing down on her. Yet she never complained. Every sacrifice was worth it, because it kept his dream alive. Her friends couldn't understand. Penny shook her head one afternoon, exasperated. "You're killing yourself for a man who doesn't even know if his ideas will work. What if he fails, Stacy? What if you give him everything, and there's nothing left for you?" But Stacy only smiled, a quiet strength in her eyes. "Then at least I'll know I believed in something, that I believed in someone. And that's enough for me." Janet was less forgiving. "Love shouldn't cost you everything. If he truly loves you, he should be the one fighting for you, not the other way around." Stacy didn't answer, because in her heart, she knew Daniel was fighting. Maybe not with money, maybe not with results yet, but with dreams. And she was willing to carry the weight until those dreams could carry them both. Their bond was deeper than romance. It was partnership. It was late nights spent rewriting failed pitches. It was Stacy bringing coffee to his desk, rubbing his shoulders as he stared at numbers that didn't add up. It was Daniel falling asleep with his head in her lap, exhausted, while she stayed awake, whispering prayers for their future. It was love that went beyond desire, though desire was always there, in the way they kissed after small victories, in the way his hands lingered on her waist when she walked past, in the way she curled against him as if he was her safe place. It was love that made the sacrifice not just bearable, but beautiful. And it was that love, raw, unshaken, unselfish, that would one day build an empire. Life for Stacy and Daniel was never painted in silver and gold. It was colored with grit, patience, and the kind of love that chose to stay even when walking away might have been easier. One evening, after a long double shift, Stacy came home to find Daniel asleep at the table, surrounded by crumpled papers. His head rested against his arms, his chest rising and falling in soft exhaustion. She dropped her bag quietly, took off her shoes, and walked over to him. Gently, she pushed the papers aside, brushing her fingers through his hair. He stirred, half asleep, murmuring, "I'm sorry, I didn't finish." "Shh," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his temple. "You've done enough tonight. Rest." Instead of waking him, she pulled the chair closer, sat beside him, and began going through the papers herself. Hours later, when Daniel opened his eyes, he found his proposal neatly typed on the laptop, ready to be sent. He looked at Stacy, still awake, her head resting on her hand, and felt a wave of something he couldn't quite name. It was more than love, more than gratitude. It was awe. "You don't have to do all this for me," he said softly. "Yes, I do," she replied simply. "Because one day this will all pay off, and when it does, I'll remind you that I was right here from the start." Their intimacy was woven into moments like these. Not always grand, but always real. There were nights when they lay tangled together in bed, too tired to speak, but needing no words. The silence itself was intimate, the sound of his breathing steadying hers, the warmth of her body melting the coldness of the world outside. Daniel often kissed her hand before falling asleep, murmuring promises against her skin. "One day, Stacy, I'll give you more than this. I'll give you everything." She would smile in the dark, holding him tighter, not because she doubted him, but because in that moment everything already felt like being in his arms. Still, the outside world was less forgiving. Job interviews ended in rejection. Business meetings ended with polite dismissals. Their landlord constantly reminded them that rent was overdue. There were days when the fridge held little more than leftovers, days when bills piled up faster than hope. And yet, Stacy never wavered. She found ways to stretch money, sometimes skipping her own meals so Daniel wouldn't go hungry. She took freelance typing jobs late at night, her fingers aching, while Daniel sketched out designs for his projects beside her. Once, when Daniel realized she hadn't eaten all day just so he could, he grew furious. "Don't you dare starve yourself for me, Stacy. I can't." She cut him off with a firm but tender voice. "Daniel, you're building something bigger than hunger. If missing one meal keeps you strong enough to keep going, then I'll gladly give it up." Her selflessness broke him and healed him at the same time. He pulled her into his arms, his voice rough against her ear. "How did I get you?" She whispered back, "You didn't get me. We chose each other. And I'll keep choosing you." Their friends didn't understand. Penny called her foolish. Janet accused her of wasting her youth on a man who might never succeed. But Stacy's love wasn't built on logic. It was built on faith. Faith in Daniel, in their bond, in the future she could already see, even if it wasn't visible yet. And Daniel, though often insecure, clung to her faith like a lifeline. One particularly cold winter night, they couldn't afford heating. The wind howled through the cracks in the window, chilling the apartment to the bone. Daniel gathered every blanket they owned and wrapped them both together. He held her close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "I'm sorry. You deserve better than this." Stacy tilted her head, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were steady, unwavering. "This is better, Daniel, because I'm with you, because I know this won't be forever." The way she looked at him in that moment made him believe in himself more than any investor ever could. He kissed her deeply, desperately, his hands memorizing the warmth of her skin, the comfort of her presence. In that kiss, he found the strength to try again tomorrow. Every little victory mattered. The first time Daniel managed to secure a meeting with a potential investor, Stacy celebrated as though they had already signed a deal. She cooked him dinner with what little they had left, set the table with mismatched plates, and lit a candle. Daniel laughed when he saw it. "What's all this for?" "I didn't get the deal yet." "No," Stacy said, smiling softly. "But you got the chance, and that's worth celebrating, because one step forward is still a step." They ate together, laughter echoing through their tiny home. Later that night, they ended up in each other's arms again, the celebration carrying into kisses that deepened into promises of forever. It wasn't luxury, but it was love. And it was enough. But the road ahead was still long. Daniel often wrestled with his doubts, pacing their apartment late into the night. Stacy always stopped him, pulled him into her arms, and steadied his shaking heart. "You're meant for greatness," she whispered one night, running her fingers through his hair. "And I'll remind you every day until you believe it yourself." Those words became his anchor, and in time, they would lead to the moment that changed everything. The day Stacy introduced him to Job, the mentor who would see the same spark in him that Stacy had seen all along. But before that breakthrough, there was sacrifice, love, and the unwavering devotion of a woman who believed enough for both of them. The days blended into a rhythm of survival. Stacy worked from dawn to dusk, pouring her energy into keeping them afloat. Daniel scribbled, planned, pitched, failed, and tried again. Their apartment often echoed with silence after rejection, but it never stayed silent for long, because Stacy refused to let it. When Daniel slumped into his chair after another meeting that went nowhere, she would kneel in front of him, her hands resting on his knees. "Look at me," she'd insist, tilting his face up toward hers. Her eyes shone with fire. "One no doesn't erase the future we're building. You're not allowed to quit. Not while I'm here." And somehow, every time, her voice stitched him back together. It wasn't always fierce encouragement. Sometimes it was quiet tenderness that kept him alive. Like the night he came home drenched from the rain, shivering with cold and disappointment. Stacy dried him off with one of their worn towels, kissed his chilled skin, and wrapped him in her arms on the couch. They didn't speak much that night. She just held him, whispering soft reassurances into the darkness until he finally slept against her chest. Or the evening when his shoes gave out, the soles peeling from two. Many miles walked in pursuit of people who never believed in him. Stacy noticed, slipped her own savings into his hand, and told him to buy new ones. He resisted. "You've been saving this for yourself." She shook her head, smiling gently. "For us, always for us." Her sacrifices weren't loud. They were stitched into the fabric of their everyday life, unnoticed by the world, but unforgettable to the man who leaned on her. Their intimacy deepened in those nights when the weight of failure hung heavy. They found comfort in each other's bodies, not just as lovers, but as two souls clinging to warmth in a cold world. Stacy often whispered dreams into his skin. "We'll have a home one day, with lights streaming through the windows, laughter in every room, and no landlord banging on our door for rent." Daniel would press his lips against her shoulder, answering in a low, husky murmur, "As long as you're there, it will be perfect." Every kiss carried more than desire. It carried gratitude. Every touch was a reminder that they weren't fighting alone. But not everyone admired their devotion. Penny grew more vocal. "Stacy, you can't keep giving like this. He's chasing fantasies, and you're exhausting yourself. What if this never works? You'll have nothing to show for it." Janet was harsher. "One day, you'll regret pouring yourself into a man who can't give you stability. Love doesn't pay bills. Wake up." Stacy listened quietly but never argued. Deep down, she knew her friends were worried out of love. But they didn't see what she saw. They didn't feel the certainty that pulsed through her when she looked at Daniel. He was more than his failures. He was possibility, and so she stood by him, even when the world told her not to. One late evening, Daniel stared at the rejection emails piling up in his inbox. His hands trembled over the keyboard. "Maybe they're right," he whispered, defeated. "Maybe I don't have what it takes." Stacy stood behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, her lips brushing his ear. "You do. They just can't see it yet. But they will, because I see it, and I'll keep seeing it until the whole world does." He closed his eyes, letting her words sink into him. She always had a way of turning his despair into determination. That night, they stayed awake until dawn, reworking the proposal line by line. Stacy typed, edited, and shaped every sentence until it gleamed. By morning, Daniel held in his hands the sharpest, clearest version of his vision. For the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they were close to a breakthrough. It was Stacy who made the connection that would change everything. Through her evening job at a small restaurant, she overheard talk of a respected investor named Job, a man known for being tough but willing to back unpolished ideas if he believed in the heart behind them. She mentioned it to Daniel over dinner, their usual simple meal, noodles in mismatched bowls. His eyes lit up, though doubt quickly followed. "A man like that wouldn't give me the time of day." Stacy reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then we'll make him listen. You have something worth believing in, Daniel, and I'll help you prove it." He searched her face, seeing no hesitation, only certainty. And for the first time in months, hope flickered inside him. That was the night Daniel kissed her with a hunger that went beyond love. It was desperation, gratitude, and longing rolled into one. They ended up tangled together on their narrow bed, their bodies speaking the truth their words couldn't hold. When he whispered against her skin, "I'll make you proud," Stacy only smiled, because in her eyes, he already had. The beginning of their empire wasn't built on money. It was built on moments like these, sacrifice, faith, and intimacy stronger than hardship. And as Stacy prepared to introduce Daniel to Job, she believed with every fiber of her being that their struggles had not been in vain. She was right. Their lives were about to change forever. The introduction to Job came like a thread of light through a tightly closed door. Stacy had heard his name whispered in conversations at the restaurant where she worked late nights. Job was a respected investor, not easily impressed, but known to have a sharp eye for raw potential. He wasn't swayed by charm alone, nor blinded by numbers on a page. What caught his attention was grit, the kind of stubbornness that kept people fighting when others quit. One evening, Stacy mentioned him to Daniel, her tone casual, though her heart beat fast. "There's someone you should meet. Job. He invests in people with vision." Daniel looked up from the notes he'd been scribbling, skepticism clouding his features. "Men like that don't waste time on people like me." Stacy reached for his hand across their worn table. "He will, because I'll make him see what I see." Her confidence was steady, unshaken. Daniel wanted to believe, but years of rejection had built thick walls around his hope. Still, with Stacy pushing, how could he say no? The night before the meeting, their apartment became a war room. Papers were spread across the table, drafts piled on drafts, corrections circled in Stacy's neat handwriting. She sat by the laptop, fine-tuning the presentation until it gleamed. Daniel paced, reciting the pitch, stumbling over his words, starting again. "You're rushing here," Stacy said gently, stopping him with a touch to his arm. "Slow down, breathe. Let him feel your passion, not your panic." Daniel sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I don't want to mess this up." "You won't," she whispered, her voice steady, grounding. "Because I'll be right there. Every word, every look. You won't be alone." Her faith was intoxicating. That night, as exhaustion finally pulled them toward bed, Daniel wrapped her in his arms and kissed her deeply. "You've given me everything, Stacy. Tomorrow, I want to start giving back." She smiled against his lips. "Just do what you were born to do. That will be enough." The meeting day arrived. Job's office wasn't flashy, no marble floors or golden accents. It was simple but commanding, with shelves of books lining the walls and a large window spilling sunlight across a heavy oak desk. Job himself was a man in his late 50s, sharp-eyed, with a presence that made even silence feel weighty. Daniel walked in with his heart pounding. Stacy squeezed his hand once before letting go, her smile giving him courage. Job gestured for them to sit. "You've got 10 minutes," he said plainly, his voice neither harsh nor kind. Daniel began his pitch, his voice shaky at first, but growing steadier as he spoke. He laid out his vision, his ideas, the problems he wanted to solve. He faltered once or twice, but every time he glanced at Stacy, she nodded, her eyes telling him, "You can do this." When he finished, silence filled the room. Job leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel like a puzzle. Then he turned to Stacy. "You had a hand in this, didn't you?" Caught off guard, Stacy hesitated, then nodded. "I helped shape it." "But the vision is his." Job's lips curved slightly, almost into a smile. "Smart. Loyal. I like that." He looked back at Daniel. "You've got ideas. More importantly, you've got someone beside you who believes in them. That's worth more than half the men who've walked into this office." Daniel's breath caught. "Does that mean—" Job leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "It means I'll take a chance on you. But don't think for a second that I'll go easy. You'll have to prove every word you just said." The deal wasn't grand. It wasn't millions, not yet. But it was enough. Enough to keep the dream alive, to move Daniel out of endless rejections and into the first taste of real possibility. When they left Job's office, Daniel grabbed Stacy's hand, pulling her into the nearest quiet corner. His eyes were wide, his voice choked. "We did it. Stacy, we actually did it." She laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, Daniel. You did it. I just believed in you." Before she could say more, he kissed her, fierce and unrestrained, right there in the hallway. Passers-by turned their heads, but neither of them cared. In that moment, all the years of sacrifice, all the nights of doubt, all the whispered promises came rushing back in the heat of their embrace. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel pressed his forehead against hers. "I swear, Stacy, this is just the beginning. One day, I'll give you the world." She smiled, her voice soft but certain. "I don't need the world, Daniel. I just need you." That evening, he surprised her. Stacy returned home after work, expecting to find him buried in papers again. Instead, she found the apartment dimly lit, the faint glow of candles flickering across the walls. On the table sat 2 plates carefully arranged, and in the center, a small box. Daniel emerged from the kitchen, looking both nervous and proud. "I wanted to celebrate. Properly this time." Her heart swelled as she looked around. "Daniel, this is beautiful." He took her hand, guiding her to the table. "It's not much, but it's a start." After dinner, he slid the small box toward her. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny charm. Nothing extravagant, but more than he could easily afford. "For you," he said, his voice thick. "A reminder that no matter how far we go, you're the reason we're here." Tears filled her eyes as she touched the necklace. "Daniel." He clasped it around her neck, then pulled her into his arms. Their kisses that night were tender, lingering, filled with the kind of intimacy that comes not from wealth, but from shared battles and victories. The days that followed were a blur of work and planning. With Job's backing, Daniel began to see doors open that had always been closed. He threw himself into the project with renewed energy, his confidence growing with each step. But, through it all, Stacy remained his anchor. She continued typing, editing, advising, the silent strength behind his rising voice. And though neither of them knew it yet, this turning point was the start of 2 journeys. Daniel's climb toward wealth, and Stacy's slow fade into the background of a dream she had helped create. The weeks after Job's agreement felt like a dream. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't chasing shadows. He was holding something real. Investors who once dismissed him began to listen, some even leaning closer when his name was mentioned in passing. The small office job helped him secure was modest but professional. A far cry from their tiny apartment floor where everything had started. And through it all, Stacy was right there, his shadow, his partner, his confidant. She drafted emails, reviewed contracts, and rehearsed his presentations with him until he could deliver them with confidence. But the sweetest part wasn't the work. It was the way Daniel began to glow again, his old doubts softening under the light of opportunity. He laughed more, smiled easier, and when he kissed her now, it wasn't just gratitude, it was a promise. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, he returned to their apartment with a bouquet of wildflowers. Stacy blinked in surprise as he handed them to her, laughter bubbling from her lips. "Flowers? We've barely paid rent, and you're buying flowers?" Daniel shrugged, grinning. "I figured you deserved more than invoices and late-night coffee." She took the flowers, her chest tightening with emotion. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said firmly, pulling her close. "You've given me everything, Stacy. I want to start giving back." That night, they cooked together. A proper meal for once, not scraps, but chicken and vegetables bought with his first small success. The kitchen filled with the aroma of food and the sound of their laughter. They fed each other bites, teasing and playful, until Daniel lifted her onto the counter, his lips meeting hers with hunger that had nothing to do with food. Their love that night was different, not desperate as before, but triumphant. It was intimacy layered with the sweetness of shared victory, a reminder that everything they had endured was worth it. But success has a way of demanding more. The closer Daniel got to his dream, the more time he spent chasing it. Early mornings bled into late nights at the new office. Phone calls replaced quiet dinners. Stacy often found herself sitting alone at their small table, the flowers he had given her wilting in a vase. When he did come home, he was exhausted, distracted, his mind still buzzing with numbers and strategies. One evening, Stacy tried to draw him back to her. She slipped behind him as he sat at the desk, pressing soft kisses along his neck. "You need rest," she whispered. He caught her hand and kissed it absently, but didn't look up from his notes. "Just a little longer. I'm close to something big." Her smile faltered, but she said nothing. She didn't want to be the reason he slowed down. Still, there were moments when he remembered her, like the night he pulled her onto his lap in the middle of his cluttered office, kissing her until the papers scattered to the floor. "You're my lucky charm," he murmured against her lips. "Every time you're near, things go right." She laughed softly, brushing her hand through his hair. "Then maybe I should never leave your side." "Maybe you shouldn't," he agreed, holding her close. It was a tender moment, a reminder of who they were at the beginning. But underneath, Stacy felt a quiet fear blooming. That, as the world opened its arms to him, he might slowly loosen his hold on hers. The necklace he had given her became her most treasured possession. Every time she touched it, she remembered his words, "You're the reason we're here." It was her anchor when the distance between them began to grow. She wore it every day, believing it meant she would never be forgotten. But love, Stacy would soon learn, doesn't always fade with a roar. Sometimes it drifts quietly, slipping away in pieces until one day you realize the person who once needed you no longer does. Job's mentorship pushed Daniel further than he had ever gone. He taught him discipline, structure, and the ruthlessness of business. Daniel absorbed it all, sharpening into the man Stacy had always believed he could be. And while she was proud, she also noticed the changes. His shirts became crisper, his tone firmer, his eyes sharper. He began to carry himself not like the man who once whispered doubts in the dark, but like someone convinced of his place in the world. It was beautiful to watch, and terrifying, because the higher he rose, the smaller her presence felt. Their love was still there, in glances, in touches, in laughter shared when he finally remembered to come home. But the balance was shifting. Stacy remained his rock, his silent strength. Yet a shadow had begun to creep at the edges of their world. And soon, that shadow would take form. Her name was Marielle. Success didn't arrive like a sudden storm. It came like a sunrise, slowly, steadily, until one day the light was so bright it was impossible to ignore. Daniel's company, once just scribbles on scraps of paper, began to take shape. With Job's guidance and Stacy's constant support, contracts rolled in. Clients who once ignored him now leaned forward to listen. The small office expanded into 2 floors. Staff were hired. The once struggling dreamer became a name people respected and feared. With every deal signed, Daniel walked taller. His shirts were sharper, his words more confident. He traded the frayed shoes Stacy had once saved up to replace for polished leather. His laughter became rare, not because he was unhappy, but because he was busy chasing more. Stacy watched with a mix of pride and ache. She had always known he was capable of this. She had always told him he would rise, but she hadn't expected that as he climbed higher, their quiet world together would start to shrink. At first, the changes were subtle. Daniel came home later, his suit jacket smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. He spoke of meetings and deadlines instead of dreams and promises. Their dinners, once a nightly ritual filled with laughter, turned into cold meals. Stacy ate alone, her eyes flicking to the door that often stayed closed until midnight. One night, she tried to bring back their old magic. She cooked his favorite dish, rice and stew the way he liked it, spicy and warm. She set the table with candles, even placed fresh flowers in a jar at the center. When Daniel walked in, she greeted him with a smile. "Surprise. I thought we could have dinner together. Just us." He kissed her cheek absently, already loosening his tie. "This looks great, love. But I've got calls to return. Maybe later." Her smile faltered. "It'll get cold. Then save me a plate. I'll eat when I'm done." He didn't notice the way her shoulders slumped as he disappeared into the bedroom, phone pressed to his ear. That night, she ate alone by candlelight, the flowers casting shadows on the empty chair across from her. Stacy tried not to complain. She told herself this was the price of growth, the cost of success. Still, when she looked at the necklace Daniel had once given her, the promise that she was the reason for his rise, she couldn't help but wonder if promises faded as quickly as flowers in a vase. Her friends noticed. Penny asked one afternoon, "Does he even see you anymore? You look lonely." Janet, never one to sugarcoat, said bluntly, "Be careful, Stacy. Men who get power sometimes forget who gave them strength." Stacy defended him, as she always did. "He's working hard. For us, for our future." But deep down, a quiet fear began to whisper, "What if they're right?" Then came Marielle. She was introduced as Daniel's new secretary, young, polished, with a smile that seemed to stretch too wide when she looked at him. She had the kind of confidence that came from knowing people noticed her, and she used it like a weapon, subtle but sharp. At first, Stacy thought nothing of it. She met Marielle once, in passing, when she stopped by the office with lunch for Daniel. "Stacy, this is Marielle," Daniel said casually, glancing between them. "She's been helping keep the office in order." Marielle extended her hand with a polite smile. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. Daniel talks about you all the time." Her words were smooth, but her eyes lingered on Daniel in a way that made Stacy's stomach twist. Still, Stacy smiled, shook her hand, and brushed off the unease. She had no reason to doubt him. Not then. But little by little, Marielle's presence began to seep into their lives. Late-night calls that Daniel insisted were just work, meetings that stretched longer than usual, small changes in his appearance, a new tie, a different cologne, details Stacy noticed but didn't dare mention. One evening, when Daniel came home smelling faintly of a floral perfume, Stacy hesitated before asking, "Long day." "Exhausting," he replied, loosening his tie. "Marielle stayed late too. We had so much to finish." Stacy forced a smile, though her chest tightened. "I see." She didn't push further. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man who once clung to her whispers of encouragement still needed her, still saw her. The contrast between then and now grew sharper. There was a time when Daniel and Stacy's nights ended with quiet walks through the city, hand in hand, talking about their dreams. Now, nights ended with him collapsing into bed, too tired to speak, his phone buzzing with messages even in the dark. There was a time when he kissed her hand before falling asleep, murmuring promises against her skin. Now, his kisses were hurried, distracted, a routine more than a gesture. There was a time when her laughter filled their apartment. Now, silence often echoed louder than any sound. Stacy missed him, even while he was right beside her. One evening, unable to ignore the ache in her chest, she tried to reach him again. She prepared dinner, dressed in the dress he once said made her look like the woman who could run the world, and waited. Daniel came home late, weary-eyed. When he saw her, his eyes softened, guilt flickering there. "You look beautiful." Her heart lifted, just a little. "Then sit with me, just tonight. No calls, no meetings, just us." For a moment he hesitated. Then he nodded. Just us. They ate together, and for a while it felt like old times. He teased her, she laughed, and the distance seemed to shrink. Later, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her slowly, the way he used to. But even in that intimacy, Stacy felt it, the faint barrier, the shadow of distraction that lingered between them. He was there, but not fully. His mind was elsewhere. His heart tugged in directions she couldn't yet see. Marielle's influence grew stronger. Daniel began praising her efficiency, her ideas, her dedication. "She's really sharp, Stacy. Honestly, she's been a huge help." Stacy smiled, but inside, something stung. She had been his silent strength for years, the one who typed, edited, and guided. Yet now, her efforts felt invisible, replaced by someone new. And though Daniel didn't notice, Stacy did. She noticed everything, the way Marielle's name slipped too easily into his conversations, the way his eyes brightened when he spoke of her. It was the beginning of a shift Stacy couldn't stop, no matter how much she wanted to. Success had given Daniel the world, but slowly, quietly, it was taking Stacy away from him. With success came invitations, gala dinners, business conferences, exclusive networking events where men in tailored suits shook hands, and women in glittering gowns clinked glasses filled with champagne. Daniel began attending them more often, always insisting they were crucial for growth. Sometimes he asked Stacy to come, but more often he went alone. The first time she attended, she felt out of place. Surrounded by wealth and glitter, she wore the best dress she owned. Simple, elegant, but modest compared to the jewels flashing around her. At Daniel's side, she tried to smile, tried to fit in. But she noticed the way some women looked at her, then at him, their eyes lingering too long. She noticed the whispers, the subtle questions. Who is she? Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He introduced her politely but quickly, then drifted toward groups where deals were being made, leaving her with a glass of wine she didn't finish. And that's when she saw Marielle again. The secretary wasn't just working late nights now. She was there too, gliding through the room in a sleek black dress, her laughter ringing like music. People noticed her. Men turned their heads. And when she walked up to Daniel, touching his arm lightly as she spoke, Stacy felt her stomach tighten. It was subtle, barely visible to anyone else, but to Stacy it was clear. The lines were beginning to blur. At home, she tried to confront him gently. "Daniel," she said one evening, sitting across from him as he typed furiously on his laptop. "You've been spending a lot of time with Marielle lately." He looked up, frowning. "She's my secretary, Stacy. That's her job, I know. But sometimes, it feels like more than that." He sighed, shutting the laptop. "You don't trust me?" Her heart squeezed. "I trust you. I just miss you. I miss us." His expression softened for a moment, and he reached for her hand. "I'm doing all this for us, for the life we dreamed of. Don't let your imagination ruin what we're building." She nodded, swallowing her doubts. But deep down, the unease remained. The contrast between then and now became impossible to ignore. Once, Daniel came home with excitement spilling from his lips, eager to share every small win with Stacy. Now, he came home late, his stories already told to others before he walked through their door. Once, they celebrated victories with laughter and kisses. Now, he celebrated them at parties she wasn't always invited to. Once, she was his partner in everything. Now, she was the woman waiting at home, while another woman became his companion in the world outside. Yet, Stacy still clung to the man she had loved from the beginning. She still believed in him, even when he began to slip away. One night, when he finally came home earlier than usual, she curled into his arms on the couch, resting her head against his chest. "Do you remember," she whispered, "when we used to dream about nights like this? When we said we'd have our own place, our own business, our own future?" Daniel chuckled softly, kissing the top of her head. "I remember. And look how far we've come." She smiled faintly. "We've come far. I just don't want to lose us along the way." He didn't answer right away. His hand stroked her hair absently, his mind elsewhere. "You won't lose me," he said finally. But even as he spoke the words, Stacy felt the hollowness in them. The breaking point came quietly. Stacy had gone to his office one afternoon, carrying lunch as she often used to. She stepped inside, only to find Daniel and Marielle laughing together, their heads bent close over his desk. The sight wasn't inappropriate, not quite, but the intimacy of it struck her like a blow. They looked up when she entered. Daniel smiled, distracted. "Stacy, hey, didn't know you'd stop by." Marielle stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'll give you two some privacy." Her eyes lingered on Daniel a second too long before she slipped out. Stacy placed the food on the desk, her hands trembling. "I thought you might be hungry." "Thanks," Daniel said, already glancing back at his notes. "You didn't have to." She wanted to scream. "Yes, I did. I've always had to. I've been doing this from the very beginning." But instead, she forced a smile, kissed his cheek, and left before the tears could spill. That night, as she lay beside him, she couldn't sleep. She turned her back to him, her hand brushing the necklace he had given her long ago. Once, it had been a symbol of his love, his gratitude, his promise. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything she was losing. She whispered into the darkness, though he didn't hear, "Don't forget me, Daniel. Don't forget us." But in her heart, she feared he already had. Success had lifted Daniel to heights he had always dreamed of. But for Stacy, it felt like the higher he climbed, the further he drifted from her. And somewhere deep down, she knew the tides were shifting. The man who once clung to her whispers of encouragement was slipping into a world where her voice no longer reached. The man she made into a billionaire was on the verge of forgetting the woman who built him. And soon, the betrayal would come. It began with whispers, little shadows Stacy tried to ignore. The perfume on his shirt, floral, lingering, not hers. The late-night texts he hid, the way his phone never left his hand. The excuses, just business, just a late meeting, just one more call. At first, she convinced herself she was imagining it. After all, she had built him from nothing. He loved her. He had to. But love doesn't lie. And deep in her bones, Stacy knew something was slipping away. One night, when he came home well past midnight, she decided to ask. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice steady though her heart pounded, "is there someone else?" He froze in the doorway, his tie loose, his shirt wrinkled. For a moment his eyes flashed with something, guilt maybe, but then his expression hardened. "You're imagining things." Her throat tightened. "Am I? Because you don't look at me the way you used to. You don't touch me the way you used to." His jaw clenched. "I'm building an empire, Stacy. I don't have time to keep proving myself to you." Tears burned her eyes. "I never asked you to prove yourself. I only asked you not to forget us." He sighed, exasperated, tossing his jacket on the chair. "This," he gestured vaguely at her, at the apartment, at everything they had been. "This isn't enough anymore. You don't understand the world I'm in now." Her heart cracked. "The world you're in?" "Daniel, I built that world with you. Every step, every sacrifice, I was there." But he only shook his head, retreating into silence. That night, they slept back to back, a canyon of unspoken words stretching between them. The truth revealed itself in fragments. A lipstick stain on a receipt, a whisper from Janet, who had seen Daniel leaving an event with Marielle, the hollow excuses that no longer convinced even him, and finally, the moment Stacy couldn't deny. She walked into his office unannounced one afternoon, carrying lunch as she used to. The door was cracked open, laughter spilling out. Her stomach dropped when she saw them, Daniel and Marielle, his hand resting casually on her lower back, their bodies too close, their voices too intimate. Her footsteps faltered. The bag in her hand trembled. Daniel looked up, startled. Stacy. Marielle straightened, her smile faint, smug even. Stacy swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "I brought you food." The silence was deafening. Daniel muttered a quick thanks, but his eyes didn't hold hers the way they once had. Stacy turned and left before the tears could betray her. That night, she confronted him. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, standing in their living room, the necklace he once gave her glinting against her throat. "Are you with her?" Daniel rubbed his face, sighing as though she were a burden. "Stacy, stop." "Stop what?" "Believing in you, fighting for you, loving you." Her voice cracked. "You owe me the truth, Daniel. Do you love her?" His silence was louder than any answer. When he finally spoke, his words were knives. "You hold me back. You'll never understand the world I'm in now. Marielle gets it. She fits. You don't." Her breath hitched, tears spilling. "After everything, after all I gave." He cut her off coldly. "I didn't ask you to. You chose to. And maybe that was your mistake." The words shattered her. For years, she had carried him, believed in him, bled for him. And now, standing before the man she had made, she realized he no longer saw her as anything more than a weight. He left that night, not for a meeting, not for business, but for her, Marielle, and Stacy, left alone in the apartment where their love was once born, crumpled to the floor, sobbing into her hands. The betrayal wasn't just in his infidelity, it was in the way he erased her, dismissed her sacrifices as if they meant nothing. Friends had warned her, but she had believed too fiercely. Penny held her as she cried. Janet's voice, though sharp, trembled with pity. "You loved him more than he ever deserved," Janet said softly. But Stacy wasn't angry. Not yet. She was broken. Every memory of their love, the candlelit nights, the whispered promises, the shared meals of nothing, felt tainted now. She had given him everything, and in return, he gave her absence. Weeks passed. Daniel paraded Marielle openly now. They attended events together, their photos splashed across magazines. The powerful businessman and his stunning secretary, the headlines called them. Stacy avoided the papers, but she couldn't avoid the whispers. Every time she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her, pity following her like a shadow. But the hardest part wasn't the public shame. It was the quiet moments alone, when she touched the necklace he had given. Her, remembering the man who once said, "You're the reason we're here." Now she wondered if he even remembered saying it. The final break came in public. Daniel hosted a gala to celebrate his company's expansion. Stacy, still clinging to the hope that maybe he would acknowledge her, attended. She wore the same necklace, the same smile she used to wear in their early days. But when she arrived, Daniel stood proudly with Marielle on his arm. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, and Daniel, the man who once kissed Stacy in a hallway after their first investor meeting, introduced Marielle as the woman who's been by my side through it all. The words hit Stacy like a blow. Her vision blurred, her chest tightened. She stumbled back, tears pricking her eyes as the world spun. She left before anyone could see her break. That night, she sat in their apartment for the last time, staring at the necklace in her hand. She unclasped it, set it gently on the table, and whispered into the empty room. "I made you a billionaire, Daniel. But I won't let you make me small." With that, she walked out, leaving behind the love she had built and the man who had forgotten it. The night Stacy left the necklace behind was the night she let go of the life she had built around Daniel. She didn't take much with her, just a small suitcase, a few clothes, and the journals she had filled during their long nights together. The rest she abandoned. She couldn't bear the sight of his suits hanging beside her dresses, or the sound of his laughter that once filled those rooms, but now belonged to someone else. She moved into a modest apartment across town, smaller even than the one where they had first begun. But it was hers. It was quiet, empty, and for the first time in years, it was free of the weight of being ignored. The nights were the hardest. Stacy would lie awake, haunted by memories of Daniel's touch, his whispered promises, the way he used to hold her when the world felt heavy. She replayed every moment, asking herself when it all began to unravel. Was it the first gala? The first late night? The first time Marielle's name slipped into their conversations? But no matter how much she searched, the answer was always the same. He chose to forget her. He chose someone else. The pain cut deeper than she could have imagined. But alongside the pain, something else stirred. A quiet strength, faint but growing. She had survived before Daniel. She could survive after him. Meanwhile, Daniel's life looked perfect from the outside. He and Marielle became the city's newest golden couple. Their photographs adorned magazine covers, their appearances at high-end restaurants and events chronicled like fairy tales. Daniel smiled for the cameras, Marielle on his arm, his empire expanding at a dizzying pace. But behind the polished smiles and glossy headlines, something darker brewed. Marielle wasn't Stacy. She wasn't the woman who stayed up late typing his proposals, who whispered faith into his ear when he doubted himself, who carried him on her back when he stumbled. She was a mirror of the life he thought he wanted, glamorous, ambitious, eager to bask in the spotlight. But mirrors don't carry weight. They only reflect. Daniel didn't notice the difference. Not yet. For Stacy, healing was a slow, fragile process. Her friends tried to help. Penny spent nights at her new apartment, cooking with her, reminding her to laugh again. Janet encouraged her to focus on herself. "You gave him too much of your life," she said firmly. "Now it's time to give that love back to yourself." At first, Stacy resisted. She still checked the news sometimes, still saw his face with Marielle's, still felt the ache twist in her chest. But with each passing day, she forced herself to look less, to let go more. She found comfort in small routines, morning walks through the park, evenings with books and tea, quiet prayers whispered into the night. Slowly, the raw wound of betrayal began to scar, and as it did, she realized something powerful. She wasn't defined by Daniel's love. She was defined by her own. Daniel, on the other hand, began to change in ways he didn't see. With Stacy gone, there was no one to steady him, no one to balance his impulsive decisions. Job noticed it first. "You're moving too fast," Job warned during a meeting. "Stability is key. Don't let your ego write checks your business can't cash." Daniel brushed him off. "I know what I'm doing." But without Stacy's quiet wisdom, his confidence slipped into arrogance. He signed risky deals, ignored red flags, and let Marielle's flattery fuel his ego. When she told him he deserved more power, more luxury, more everything, he believed her. He didn't see that her loyalty was tied not to him, but to what he could give her. One evening, Stacy passed by a glossy billboard in the city center. It showed Daniel and Marielle smiling like royalty, the slogan beneath: success, power, legacy. For a moment, her chest tightened, but then she remembered the necklace she had left behind, the man who had told her she didn't belong in his world. And instead of tears, a small, sad smile touched her lips. Let him have his legacy. She was building her own. Her first step came when Penny pushed her to apply for a business program. "You were the brains behind half of his work," Penny reminded her. "Why not build something for yourself?" At first, Stacy hesitated. She felt too broken, too empty. But as she sat at her small desk one night, flipping through her old journals, she realized Penny was right. Every idea she had once shaped for Daniel could just as easily be shaped for herself. So she began again, slowly, carefully, with the same determination she once poured into him. But this time, she poured it into herself. Daniel barely noticed her absence at first. Surrounded by cameras, money, and Marielle's constant presence, he convinced himself he was happier. He told himself Stacy had been holding him back, that letting her go was the price of greatness. But the cracks were there, waiting. Marielle wasn't as patient as Stacy. She wasn't selfless. When Daniel stumbled, she didn't steady him, she criticized him. When he stayed late at work, she didn't bring him food, she complained. When his decisions went wrong, she didn't remind him of his worth. She questioned his strength. And slowly, the man who once had Stacy's unwavering devotion realized what he had traded it for. But by then, it was too late. Stacy was no longer waiting in the shadows for him to remember her. She was moving forward, scarred but stronger, carrying lessons carved into her heart. She still hurt. She still loved him, in the way that first loves linger, long after they're gone. But she no longer needed him to survive, because in the end, Daniel may have chosen betrayal, but Stacy chose herself. Stacy's world had crumbled, but from the ashes, something new began to grow. At first, her life felt hollow. The mornings were quiet, too quiet. She no longer woke to Daniel's restless pacing or his mumbled ideas spilling into the air. The silence was sharp, heavy, but slowly it became her own. In that silence, Stacy began to hear herself again. Her first steps were small. She organized her journals, pages filled with notes, edits, and strategies she had once shaped for Daniel. As she flipped through them, a realization struck her. She had been the architect all along. The polished proposals, the sharp strategies, the plans that had impressed Job and others, they had her fingerprints all over them. She hadn't just supported Daniel's dream, she had built it. The thought was both painful and liberating. Painful because he had dismissed her. Liberating because it meant she was capable of creating something of her own. Penny and Janet became her anchors. "You've spent too long lifting someone else," Penny told her one evening over coffee. "It's time to lift yourself." Janet, ever blunt, added, "Don't waste another tear on him. You have brilliance he couldn't see because he was too busy staring at his secretary. Let the world see what he missed." Their words planted seeds. And Job, surprisingly, watered them. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in a cafe, staring at her laptop. He sat across from her without asking. "You know," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you were always sharper than Daniel gave you credit for. I saw it the day you both walked into my office. Half of his success was written in your eyes." Stacy blinked, caught off guard. "You knew?" Job chuckled. "Of course. I invest in people, not just ideas. And you, Stacy, you're the kind of person people follow. Why waste that?" Her chest tightened. "Because I don't know where to start." "Start where you always did," Job said simply. "With yourself." That night, she sat at her small desk, surrounded by notebooks and scribbles. She wrote down her ideas, not Daniel's, not anyone else's, but hers. By dawn, she had mapped the beginnings of a business plan. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. But it was hers. The days turned into weeks, and Stacy threw herself into her project. She researched, learned, and applied everything she had once done for Daniel. Penny and Janet helped in whatever ways they could, Penny connecting her with contacts, Janet proofreading her proposals. For the first time, Stacy wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. She was standing on her own. And as she worked, she began to heal. Her healing wasn't just at work. It was in the way she took herself on walks in the park, breathing in the crisp air and reminding herself that the world was still beautiful. It was in the quiet evenings when she cooked for herself, savoring the taste of independence. It was in the laughter she found again with Penny and Janet, laughter that no longer felt forced. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the mirror, her eyes brighter, her shoulders straighter, and she realized she was glowing in a way Daniel had never allowed her to. Romance came softly, like a whisper she didn't expect. There was a man she often saw at the cafe where she worked on her plans. Kind eyes, a gentle smile, the kind of presence that felt safe. They exchanged polite greetings at first, nothing more. But one day, when he noticed her staring at her laptop with frustration, he leaned over. "Looks like a battle," he said with a smile. She laughed, surprised by the warmth in his voice. Something like that. Battles are easier with allies, he replied. At least, that's what I've learned. His words lingered long after he left. She didn't know if it would grow into more, and for the first time, she wasn't desperate for it to. It was enough to feel seen. But what mattered most was Stacy herself. The more she worked, the more she realized her worth had never depended on Daniel's love. Her worth was in her resilience, her brilliance, her heart. She had made him a billionaire. Now, she was building herself into something even greater. Not just wealthy, but whole. Daniel, meanwhile, was too blinded to notice what he had lost. He paraded Marielle, boasted of his success, and drowned in the glitter of his empire. But cracks were forming. Investors grew wary of his reckless decisions. Employees whispered about his arrogance. And Marielle, who once flattered him endlessly, grew impatient, her eyes fixed more on his wallet than his heart. Without Stacy's quiet wisdom, his empire was built on sand, and though he didn't know it yet, the tide was already coming in. For Stacy, however, the tide was turning in her favor. Her first pitch, her own pitch, landed. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to prove she was capable. Enough to spark momentum. Enough to tell her that the world she was building could stand. When she walked out of that meeting, Penny and Janet were waiting with wide smiles, and she laughed through her tears. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising. Stacy's days began to look different. Where there had once been tears and endless memories of what she had lost, there was now routine, purpose, and something Daniel could never give her, peace. Each morning, she woke early, brewed her tea, and sat at her small desk with determination. She mapped strategies, wrote proposals, and connected with people who believed in her ideas. The work was exhausting, but it was hers. Every email sent, every draft rewritten, every meeting scheduled was proof that she was no longer a shadow. She was a light in her own right. And the glow showed. When Penny stopped by one morning with pastries, she paused in the doorway, smiling. "Look at you. You look radiant." Stacy laughed softly, shaking her head. "Radiant? I've barely slept." "Radiant isn't about sleep," Penny replied, sitting beside her. "It's about freedom. You finally let go of him. And it shows." For the first time in months, Stacy believed it. Her business grew in small but steady steps. She pitched an innovative idea to a local firm, and though they hesitated at first, her clarity and confidence won them over. The deal wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover her bills comfortably and reinvest in her dream. She called Penny and Janet that night, tears in her eyes. "I did it. They said yes." Janet whooped on the other end of the line. "I knew it. I told you. You were the real genius all along." Penny's voice softened. "This is just the beginning, Stace. You're going to soar." As she hung up, Stacy sat quietly for a moment, letting the truth sink in. She didn't need Daniel to succeed. She never had. Her healing reached beyond business. The man from the cafe, his name was Adrian, began appearing more often. Sometimes he sat near her, offering a quiet smile as they both worked. Other times he struck up conversations about books, music, or life. One afternoon, when her laptop froze and frustration bubbled inside her, Adrian leaned over with a gentle grin. "Want me to take a look?" She hesitated, then slid it toward him. In minutes, he had it working again. "You're a lifesaver," she said, relief flooding her. He shrugged. "Just returning the favor. You saved me once with that smile when I was having a rough day." Fair trade. Her cheeks warmed, and for the first time in a long while, her heart fluttered. She didn't know if it would become something more, but Adrian's presence was different. It wasn't demanding or overwhelming. It was steady, respectful. The kind of presence that reminded her love didn't always have to hurt. Evenings became her time of reflection. She no longer spent them crying over Daniel or scrolling through news of his life with Marielle. Instead, she journaled, prayed, and allowed gratitude to take root in her heart. Gratitude for Penny and Janet, who never left her side. Gratitude for Job, who had reminded her of her worth. Gratitude for the strength she hadn't known she had until it was tested. And slowly, Gratitude replaced bitterness. Meanwhile, Daniel's world sparkled on the outside, but Stacy knew the truth. It was built on borrowed strength. She heard whispers from contacts, risky investments, impatient investors, tension behind closed doors. She didn't celebrate his cracks. She wasn't vengeful, but she couldn't help the quiet ache of irony. He had left the woman who steadied him for someone who only added weight. Months passed, and Stacy's company gained traction. She hosted her first small event, standing before a room of professionals, her voice calm, her presence commanding. When she finished her presentation, the applause felt different from anything she had ever experienced. This wasn't for Daniel. This wasn't for anyone else. This was for her. As she stood at the podium, Penny and Janet cheering in the back row, Stacy's chest swelled with pride. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. That night she returned home, set her shoes aside, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken anymore. She was beautiful, strong, unshaken. She touched the bare skin where the necklace once hung, no longer mourning its absence. She didn't need it. Because the true promise had never been in Daniel's gift. The promise was in herself. The promise that no matter who left, she would always rise again. Her story was no longer about heartbreak. It was about rebirth. Stacy had been betrayed, yes, but betrayal had not destroyed her. It had built her into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone radiant. And as she stood at her window that night, city lights glittering, in the distance she whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Daniel, not for the pain, but for teaching me that I was always enough." She smiled then, soft and certain, because Stacy was no longer defined by what she had lost. She was defined by everything she was becoming. At first, Daniel's life with Marielle looked like everything he had ever wanted. The magazines called them a power couple. The photos splashed across business journals showed them stepping out of sleek cars, attending glittering galas, sipping champagne under chandeliers. Daniel smiled for the cameras, convinced that this was success. The lonely boy who once scribbled notes in a dim apartment had finally become the man who owned the room. And with Marielle on his arm, he felt invincible. But the thing about flashes is that they fade, and when the cameras turned away, Daniel began to notice the shadows. The first cracks appeared in his business. Without Stacy's quiet wisdom guiding his decisions, Daniel became reckless. He signed deals without reading the fine print, trusted promises without asking the hard questions. He spent lavishly on appearances, grand offices, luxury cars, events that looked impressive but drained resources. Investors who once believed in his charm began to whisper. Job, who had been his mentor, pulled him aside one afternoon. "You're burning too fast, Daniel," Job warned. "Wealth isn't built on spectacle. It's built on discipline." "You've forgotten that." Daniel bristled, defensive. "I know what I'm doing." Job's gaze was steady, heavy with disappointment. "No, you knew what you were doing when Stacy was beside you. Now you're chasing illusions." The words stung, but Daniel brushed them off. He told himself Job was old, out of touch. He told himself he didn't need Stacy anymore. He had Marielle now. But even as he thought it, something inside him twisted. Marielle was nothing like Stacy. She thrived in luxury, loved the spotlight, and demanded more. More gifts, more trips, more attention. At first, Daniel indulged her, eager to please. But the more he gave, the more she wanted. And when he stumbled, when a deal fell through or a headline wasn't flattering, Marielle didn't soothe him with whispers of faith. She criticized. "You can't keep making mistakes like this, Daniel. People are watching." "I'm doing everything I can," he snapped once, exhausted. "Then maybe your best isn't enough," she replied coolly, her eyes drifting to her phone. The words cut, not because they were harsh, but because they were familiar, the echo of a doubt Stacy had once erased with love. Loneliness began to creep in. Nights with Marielle were not like nights with Stacy. Stacy had filled silence with warmth, her presence a balm even when words weren't spoken. Marielle filled the silence with complaints, demands, and distraction. Daniel found himself staring at the ceiling in the dark, memories of Stacy surfacing unbidden, the way she used to laugh at his jokes, The way she curled against him when the world felt heavy. The way she whispered, "Don't give up, love. One day the world will know your name." His chest tightened. The world did know his name now. But what good was it, if the one person who made him believe in it was gone? The fall quickened. Investors grew impatient. "Your spending is unsustainable," one warned. "You're gambling with our money," another accused. Deals collapsed. Lawsuits followed. The empire Stacy had quietly built the bones of began to shake, piece by piece. Daniel tried to steady it, but without her, his vision was unfocused, his strategies weak. He made decisions driven by ego, not wisdom, and every mistake pushed him further down. One evening, he returned home to find Marielle packing her bags. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She didn't even flinch. "Leaving?" "Leaving? After everything?" She cut him off, her tone cold. "Daniel, I didn't sign up for failure. You were fun when the money flowed, when the lights were bright. But now, you're sinking. And I don't sink with men. I rise with them." His hands clenched. "So, that's all I was to you? A ticket?" She slipped her ring off and set it on the table. "That's all you ever were to yourself. Goodbye, Daniel." And with that, she walked out, heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving silence in her wake. The emptiness was suffocating. Daniel wandered through his massive house, the house he once dreamed of buying for Stacy. Now every room echoed with absence. The laughter that once filled the air was gone. The warmth, the love, the faith, gone. He poured himself a drink, staring at the glass, and for the first time, he admitted it to himself, he had traded gold for glitter. He had abandoned the only woman who had ever truly loved him for someone who only loved what he could provide. And now, both were gone. The world outside didn't wait for him to grieve. The headlines changed. Investors pulled out. His name, once celebrated, was dragged through the mud. "From billionaire to bankrupt," one paper read. Daniel slammed the paper down, his chest burning with anger. But when the rage subsided, only sorrow remained, because deep down, he knew. Stacy had warned him without words. She had been the anchor, the balance, the love that gave him strength. Without her, he wasn't a king. He was just a man, broken and alone. Nights became his torment. He would lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past. The way Stacy had smiled at him across a flickering candle. The way she had typed proposals while whispering, "This will work, Daniel. I believe in you." The way she had worn the necklace he gave her like it was worth more than diamonds. Tears burned his eyes. He pressed his hands over his face, groaning. "What have I done?" But it was too late. The woman who made him a billionaire was gone, and he was left with nothing but the ruins of what he had destroyed. Daniel's empire crumbled faster than he could hold it together. Contracts dissolved, investors withdrew, and one by one, the foundations of his company collapsed. The glamorous office floors that once buzzed with energy now echoed with silence. Employees left in droves, their loyalty shaken, their faith in him gone. The headlines were merciless. "Billionaire burns out. A fortune lost in reckless deals." The rise and fall of Daniel Cole. From visionary to cautionary tale, each article was another knife to his chest. Job visited him once, long after the empire had collapsed. He found Daniel sitting alone in his near-empty office, the desk stripped bare. "You were warned," Job said, his voice calm but firm. Daniel looked up, his eyes hollow. "I thought I was untouchable." "No one is untouchable," Job replied. "But you were ungrateful, and that made you blind." Daniel swallowed hard, guilt pressing into his throat. "Do you think Stacy, ever hated me?" Job's gaze softened, though he didn't sit. "No. She loved you too much to hate you, but she also loved herself enough to walk away." Those words hit harder than any headline. Nights were his worst punishment. Alone in the vast emptiness of his house, Daniel wandered the halls, haunted by ghosts of what could have been. He remembered Stacy cooking in their tiny kitchen, laughing at his jokes, whispering promises into his ear when he doubted himself. He remembered the necklace he had given her, her tears of joy when she wore it for the first time. He pressed his palms against his face, groaning, "God, what have I done?" No answer came, only silence. The world, once at his feet, now mocked him. At a networking event he attempted to attend, people whispered as he entered. Once, all eyes had turned in admiration. Now, they turned in pity, or worse, in amusement. "That's him," someone muttered. "The billionaire who lost it all. I heard his secretary left him too," another laughed. "Didn't he dump the woman who built him?" Figures. The whispers sliced deeper than any business failure, because they reminded him of what he had lost long before his fortune. Stacy. One evening, desperate, Daniel scrolled through his old emails. He found the ones Stacy had typed late into the night, the careful edits, the strategies that had once made him shine. He read her words again and again, tears blurring his vision. She had always been his brilliance, and he had thrown her away. In a drunken haze, he dialed her number. His hands trembled as the line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. But there was no answer. He left no message. What could he say? "I'm sorry I betrayed you. Sorry, couldn't rewrite the years. Sorry, I couldn't erase the public humiliation. Sorry, couldn't heal the wound he had carved into her heart." Meanwhile, Stacy's name began to surface in circles of influence. Quietly, without fanfare, her business grew. The same investors who abandoned Daniel started whispering about her clarity, her discipline, her undeniable brilliance. Daniel saw her name once in an article, "A rising entrepreneur carves her own path." There was no mention of him. And in that absence, Daniel felt the sharpest cut of all. She had risen without him. Stronger than before, while he drowned in the wreckage of what he had destroyed. One night, Daniel stood at the window of his empty house, staring at the city lights in the distance. His reflection looked older, worn, hollow. Once, those lights had represented victory. Now they mocked him, reminding him that somewhere out there, Stacy was thriving. He whispered her name into the dark, his voice cracking. "Stacy, forgive me." But forgiveness would not restore what he had lost. By the time bankruptcy became official, Daniel was a ghost of the man he once was. The luxury cars were repossessed. The mansion was stripped bare. The empire was gone. All that remained was silence and regret. And so, the man Stacy had made into a billionaire now stood at the bottom, broken and forgotten, haunted by the memory of the only woman who ever truly loved him. Time healed what Daniel had broken. For Stacy, the scars remained, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman curled on the floor, sobbing over a necklace. She was a woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece, turning pain into strength. Her business flourished. What began as scribbled notes in her journals grew into a thriving enterprise. Investors admired her clarity, her discipline, her vision. Clients trusted her not just because she was brilliant, but because she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived betrayal and turned it into wisdom. At events, people whispered her name with respect. Stacy Monroe, sharp, poised, unstoppable. And when she walked into a room, she didn't need anyone on her arm to validate her presence. She was enough. One evening, she stood on a stage, delivering a keynote address to a packed hall of entrepreneurs. She spoke not only about business, but about resilience. "Sometimes," she said, her voice steady, "the people you build with won't stay. Sometimes the ones you sacrifice everything for will walk away. But betrayal does not define you. What defines you is how you rise after the fall." The applause was thunderous, and as Stacy smiled, her eyes shone with the truth she had earned. She had risen. Meanwhile, Daniel lived in the shadows. He was no longer invited to the glamorous galas or sought after for business deals. The world that once adored him had moved on. He rented a small apartment now, his suits no longer tailored, his hair streaked with exhaustion. But the emptiness inside him wasn't just about the fortune he had lost. It was about Stacy. Every night, he thought of her, her laughter, her whispers, her faith. He thought of the way she had once believed in him so fiercely, and how he had thrown it away for glitter that dissolved in his hands. He wanted to see her again, to apologize, to beg forgiveness. But he also knew she didn't need him anymore. Still, one evening, he tried. It was at a charity event that Stacy's company had sponsored. Daniel hadn't been invited, but he came anyway, desperate for a glimpse. From the corner of the room, he watched her. She glowed beneath the lights, poised and graceful, speaking with leaders who hung on her every word. She wore no necklace, no flashy jewels, only elegance that came from within. For a moment, Daniel's chest tightened. This was the woman he had once held, the woman who had once whispered faith into his ear. And he had destroyed it. When the event ended, he approached her quietly, hesitant, his heart in his throat. "Stacy." She turned, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of their history pressed heavily between them. He swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry." His voice cracked, raw with regret. "For everything. For forgetting you. For betraying you. You made me who I was, and I threw it away. And now I'm nothing." Stacy studied him, her gaze calm, unreadable. She saw not the powerful billionaire she once built, but a man stripped bare, humbled by his own choices. Finally, she said softly, "You're not nothing, Daniel. You're a lesson." His breath caught. "You taught me," she continued, "that love without gratitude will always crumble. That sacrifice must be met with loyalty, and that I was stronger than I ever realized." Tears welled in his eyes. "Do you hate me?" She shook her head. "No, I don't hate you. I don't even regret loving you. Because without that pain, I wouldn't be the woman I am today." Her words were gentle but firm, a door closing with grace. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He wanted to beg, to plead for another chance, but he saw in her eyes that she had already moved on. Not to another man, though perhaps one day she would, but to herself, to a life where she was whole without him. And so, with a trembling breath, he whispered, "I hope you find happiness, Stacy. The kind I couldn't give you." She gave a small, serene smile. "I already have." Then she turned, walking away with elegance, leaving Daniel standing alone in the crowd. That night, Daniel sat in his empty apartment, tears streaming down his face. He had lost her forever. But Stacy, she slept peacefully, her heart finally free. Stacy's story was not about a billionaire who betrayed her. It was about a woman who discovered her worth when the world tried to diminish it. True love should uplift, not discard. Gratitude should anchor success, not arrogance. And betrayal, though it breaks, also rebuilds. Because in the end, Stacy learned the greatest truth of all. Her value was never defined by who loved her. It was defined by how fiercely she loved herself. If this story moved you, let it live beyond this moment. Give it a like, share it with someone who believes in love and resilience, and subscribe to Mr. Leonardo's stories for more powerful tales that remind us of life's deepest lessons. Until next time, stay inspired, stay strong, and never forget your worth.